Thank you so much for coming tonight. Before we get into it, I just want to, on behalf of POC Collective, thank a few people, and that's Karen Tokanada, Alex Sarkisian, and Alice Andrews of the Students Association for basically providing the funding and advice and help needed to organise this. So thank you to you guys. And of course, Amahra Spence for coming out from Birmingham to be here tonight. Not only is she an artist and creator herself, but she is actively involved in finding solutions to the problem through her practice in order to protect communities, including her work with Maia Group. Maia is a Birmingham-based organisation advocating for the arts as a catalyst for social change and investing in artist-led approaches necessary for this. And in addition to this, she has a TED Talk on why cities need artists and the positive local outcomes of artists and designers mobilising. So altogether, we basically felt that gentrification as a topic is hugely important for us to be aware of in our practices, yet is completely, for some reason, absent from the curriculum. So we basically hoped that tonight will be a positive push in getting this issue more into the conscience of the institution, with the perfect person to take us through it. So, without further ado, can everyone give a warm welcome to Amahra?
Hey everyone. So, 4 hours is how long the train took, y'all. I'm tired. It's windy. Y'all got heels. I'm from Birmingham. I don't know where that accent's come from. So, hey, so it's my first ever time in Scotland altogether. It's my first ever time in Glasgow. So thank you so much for having me. Thank you to Effie and the whole POC Collective for inviting me up. Disclaimer: I don't have any answers for you, by the way. So if that was the starting point. So how many artists do I have in the room? Just woo. How many curators? Woo! Designers, unidentified titles. No one has a clue what they're really doing here, but we move. Gang. So I'm an artist. Sometimes I like that term, sometimes I really don't. I work mostly with performance, installation, all the other things that lots of us do. I'm also a mum. Seeing children in the room is like, hunty, yes! Thank you. So my practice is really invested in trying to find poetic and pragmatic solutions to try and address some of the isms and schisms that we got going on. So as Effie said, 2013 I set up a company called Maia. The truth is, after I graduated from an arts-based degree, I had no idea what I was doing. I don't want to terrify some of you, but it is the Wild West out there. So my friend and I had both graduated at the same time. We left Birmingham to study, returned, and were kind of faced with all of these questions about how do you have a sustainable career, any type of career, how do you know what to do, how do you know where to go, how do you connect with people. And initially we set up Maia as a sort of vehicle to addressing some of these challenges. I'm just going to press play. This is going to do its own thing. I'm going to do my own thing. Wherever we meet, we meet. So, yes, Maia, 2013. How do we understand each other? How do we understand the arts ecosystems that exist in cities outside of London? How do we organise in order to have a sustainable career? At the time, we thought, oh, well, business skills. It was 2013, it was a really different time. We thought business skills, we'll connect artists with business skills, entrepreneurial practice, blah-de-blah-de-blah. And then it's kind of like, there are some serious inequities that are actually existing in our communities. Before business skills even make sense, maybe we should look at those. But it was quite a long road to get there. So we started doing some cool stuff. So we started platforming artists, and that network that we'd amassed was growing and growing, which meant lots of sexy institutions, I say sexy, institutions started to take notice and said, oh, can you do this, that and the other for us? And we were like, cool, because then that means we'll get some money, we can then pay the artists better that we're working with. Maybe that's some form of ecosystem. It really quickly became clear that we couldn't actually talk about any of that stuff unless we're really prepared to talk about how money flows and how wealth works and how power really works in the arts and the creative industries. So for years we've been going into other institutions and spaces and doing their work for them basically for very little in return. We were creating things that brought people into their spaces that they wouldn't have actually been able to connect with themselves. And they were doing things, we were doing things that were sort of adding to, I guess, their legacy, adding to their metrics, adding to their evaluations and stuff. But in turn, they would use that to then generate additional income, but we weren't seeing any of that mutuality at all, any reciprocity at all. And actually, our communities in some ways were being harmed, whether it was institutions that were just not being respected for people's culture, for people's faith, for people's pronouns, like really basic shit, right? They were being able to use our energy to justify some of their stuff. And we wanted to understand, like, what do we need to do? What do we need to organise in order to look at some of those isms and schisms? But it raised a question for us about who holds the value of the work that we do. Right, so we go into these spaces and we create this energy, we create this vibe, we do all of this, we give our everything. Where does the value go? Who encapsulates that? Who holds on to that? And what happens with it afterwards? Are there ways that we can share the value in a more regenerative way? And if other organisations aren't going to be receptive to our ways of working, then can we design our own spaces where growth and change can happen alongside sensitivity? We had to take a look at some really deep infrastructural issues that were affecting people's abilities to live and work creatively. Because it became quite impossible to talk about sustained creative practice if we weren't going to talk about race, if we weren't going to talk about class, wealth, power, gender, geography. If we weren't going to talk about all those things that actually affect people's abilities to be creative, then what were we doing and what space were we occupying? Even economic disparity and all the things in between. And that thinking for us, it really started to mark a shift in terms of how we were practicing and working. And it saw us start to produce things that were going to address solutions to those inequities through the lens of space. And here's some things we know. So artists create heat, artists create energy, artists create buzz, and artists do lots of like cool stuff. We create fires, we draw energy, and we bring people together. But you know, that saying, like, sometimes your light attracts moths and sometimes your heat attracts parasites. Sometimes the same can be said for the historical relationship between artists, communities and developers. Or gentrification more broadly. Okay, quick raise of hands. How many people heard the word gentrification before? Well, thank you because y'all are here. Outside of that title of the show, of the talk. How many people would know how to define it? Ooh, I expected more hands. How many people I would definitely not be in any position to define it at all? Everyone. So who believes that what they might have heard from gentrification, there's any hope of it being positive? Ooh, interesting. Okay, a couple of hands. Who believes there's absolutely no chance it could be positive? Interesting, okay. Is that because nobody really knows what the bloody hell it is? So the dictionary definition, I'm just going to read this. It talks about a process of renovating and improving a house, neighbourhood or area to conform to middle class taste. Who thinks it could be a positive? So, you know, that in all of its glory can raise some more questions for us, like what are the adverse social effects when a disinvested part of the place is improved to suit the tastes, the wants and the buying power of a wealthier elite? And so I'm here to speak a little bit on some of this today, but like I said, I ain't got answers, but we can talk about it after. So the relationship between artists, developers, place, community, it's a bit murky. And in many ways, artists have come to be known as both the victim and the perpetrators in the displacement of people through their complicity, through their desire, and through the things that benefit them: cheap rent, connections, income, all of the above. I want to invite you today to be wary of and question labels like regeneration and renewal and gentrification even, but it feels like there's already some resistance. They might be disguising social cleansing. Anyone heard the term social cleansing? A few people. Anybody heard the term art washing? Cool, we'll come back to that. So they might be disguising social cleansing or strategic displacement of poorer residents who don't quite fit the image of what a prosperous neighbourhood is supposed to look like. But here's where it gets tricky, because there's a history of art and culture being used in what has strategically come to be known as creative placemaking. Anybody heard that term before? Anybody go to like these really dry-ass conferences about like placemaking and all that stuff? Lovely, lovely stuff. So a lot of organisations are in this space and they're happy to be part of that extractive systems if it means that they benefit. And we have to look at that when we're talking about like the creative ecosystem, when we're talking about the creative industries, the cultural industries, the arts. There are a lot of organisations, there are a lot of people who are just happy to benefit from those systems. And creative placemaking in those contexts, they're actually a strategy that's disguising something that's more greed, something that's about greed behind fun symbols of capitalism. For some of us, as many of us will know, exploitation and oppression, it's not a new thing by any standard. In fact, it has a generational history. But now we're seeing economic disparity increase, as those who lose the most are those with the least to lose in the first place. We're talking about disparity by design. Many of our cities were built upon cheap, free or slave labour. It's capitalism, it's entitlement of space, it's colonialism, and it's recycled wealth that our cities come from. But the thing about power is it really likes to hold on to itself, so that's how it thrives. It's selective, it's elite. In the UK, so much of the gentrification that we're seeing is catalysed by the post-2008 crash era. Good times. A time when the world's greed and its ability to inflate the housing market tripped over itself. On home soil, we saw and continue to see the demolition of council homes and long-standing community settings for new, more expensive private accommodation that only the wealthy can afford. In some cases, even the preservation of those very buildings are to basically replace those tenants, put some new windows in and then charge triple the amount for them. And we see that in places like Battersea in London, we see that in Park Hill in Sheffield, the estate in Sheffield, and we've seen that across the country in lots of different spaces. And we have to ask ourselves what is lost in that process. Yes, homes, libraries, community centres, youth centres, memories, all of the things in between. The poverty that has apparently been fixed by regeneration has just been dispersed, and then we get a more scattered view of economics across the country. Really, exclusion is what's being rebranded as regeneration. This is why people talk about social cleansing. Has anyone heard of Boyle Heights in Los Angeles? Google it. So it's an area in LA, and that was one of the first sort of spaces where I'd heard about art washing, which is basically when a property developer comes in, invites artists. You probably are familiar with it if you haven't heard the term before. You invite artists in, you say, here you go, here's some free studio space for a year. Anyone familiar with that kind of, have some free studio space for a year? The thing you don't realise when you say, oh, this sounds like a great opportunity, is there's a master plan around that area that's already been predetermined about what's going to happen afterwards. So you come in as an excited artist with all of your amazing ideas and energy and everything, you come and make that place sexy for them, you basically sell it for them 10 times the original value. And we see that in places all across the world. And I know that that's been a conversation that's happened a lot in Glasgow, because we've heard it down in Birmingham about what's happening here, and that the art school has a part to play in that. So in Boyle Heights, it was the first place that I heard about LA, and I remember looking at the protest, and on one of the placards it read, "Gentrification is urban colonialism," and I went, ooh. So this is the context of what we're in. And how does this happen? Some hierarchical force has decided that some spaces are more valuable than others. Think about the language that we use when we talk about certain parts of the city. I'm from Birmingham. Is anyone from Birmingham? Oh my God! One person, we're in. I'm just going to put you on the spot for a second. Which part of Birmingham? Ooh, interesting part of the city. B12. Gang gang. So that's on the south side of the city, and what we're seeing in Birmingham, we have like a super centralised city centre, and sort of how infrastructure spreads across that, it gets a little tricky. But the city centre is currently being like invested in so much. So it's like, I mean, I walked up here from the train station and I saw like construction site as soon as I got to a certain part of the city centre. In Birmingham, that's sort of all over. Birmingham has never really had a residential city centre at all until the last few years, where it's escalated so quickly. And with that means particular things, right? It means these are going to be new people who are coming to live here. It's going to be people who have never been accustomed to the economics of Birmingham. It's going to be people who, for them, money flows different. HS2, y'all know about HS2. If that thing ever bloody happens, it will be something else. At HS2, it kind of meant then that a lot of people were looking at Birmingham and saw, let's say if you're from London, cheap rent. It looks cheap from the capital, but in Birmingham, those city centre prices were not affordable to lots of people in that city. So we have to think about the language that we use about some parts of our cities, how we talk about the people who live in those places. Where does that come from? It seems that we need to reimagine these places for ourselves and create anchor cultural spaces so that lots of other game-changing shit in our communities can happen. But here's the thing, because developers in a traditional sense, they don't make something out of nothing. They play off like cultural capital, they play off potential, they play off the energy that everybody else has about that space. And it has to be worthwhile for them. Regeneration is often about exploiting and extracting this value for private financial gain. And we the artists are lured in by the cheap rents, by the cool public spaces, by the lattes, by the street art. It's a tactic. You will have seen art washing in practice, even if you've never heard the term. And it masks really exploitative practice. Is it possible to take back our towns and cities? Is it possible to hold on to the value that we create and uphold our integrity while doing so? We've been working for so long within these systems that continually oppress us. But then I came across the work, we were talking about him earlier today, the Astor Gates. Has anyone heard of the Astor Gates? Cool, y'all quit now, huh? The Astor Gates, a Chicago-based sculptor, activist, artist, property developer by trade, so he has a very interesting insight into the world. But what he's done on the south side of Chicago, I find him very interesting for how he talks about his practice as a sculptor and manipulating clay into manipulating what a community looks like, what a district looks like. He basically invested in his hood, put in a fair bit of money and a heck of a lot of sweat equity, and with his organisation and his connection to the School of Art in Chicago, he invested in the south side of Chicago, which by many metrics, as we know, is one of, I was saying I don't like the term deprived, but by the classic metrics, south side of Chicago is one of the deprived areas in the city. Predominantly African American neighbourhood, high levels of unemployment, massive disconnect economically, disparity economically, and all those things. And to make a statement to say, I want to invest in this side of the city was something that he was like, I really want to be pragmatic with my artistry. And with the very little cash flow that I have, what are the other forms of investment that I can make? So I definitely recommend looking him up. Also, Rick Lowe, who was one of the founders of Project Row Houses. That's an initiative in Houston, Texas. And what they did is they basically took shotgun houses, which are like you think in America, like the long houses, like really super narrow, and there's like a block of them. They were about to be demolished, and him and his organisation, they kind of took them over and said, can we turn these into assets with and for the community? And it's not about having sort of a top-down approach for what this looks like, it's how do we work with the people who are here in a really, really organic way. So we know there are a lot of single mothers in the third ward of Texas, so let's get them in and say what these houses should be. So they said, we just want cheap rent and space for our children to run about. So they designed the houses based on their needs. And they worked with a lot of artists to kind of like come in and reimagine the houses. But I think it's always that thing of like, it's a very particular set of artistry that we're really talking about. When we talk about, oh, any artist come in, it always feels like there's always been this murky bit of the reason why there's so much resistance about artists and coming in and communities and displacement and all those things, and artists being the vehicles for displacement, because sometimes we don't need the artists with like the sexiest names and the sexiest titles and the amount of clout and all that kind of stuff to come in and do the work. It's who's deeply connected to that mission. awards, blah, blah, blah. So I came across the Astor Gates and Wicklow, and although I don't think their work is perfect by any means, it still raises a lot of questions about who and how and the mechanisms. It helped to challenge my thinking about the relationship between artists, communities and developers. They were really talking about, like social innovation in a really particular kind of way, but they were doing it pragmatically. They were doing it initially as an experiment until it became a real thing. So they were talking about social equity, they were talking about race, they were talking about land justice and all of these things with BD energy, excuse me. So I'm just thinking why the hell ain't we designing for that kind of stuff? Why aren't we designing with land justice at the heart of everything that we're doing? Why aren't we thinking about those things actively, intentionally, as creative people, even at this point in our practice? Does the institutions that we're part of have something to say about that? Why don't we design intentional systems and conditions to help form a new kind of collective stewardship? Can we be custodians of place as well as guards, as well as producers of culture, as well as advocates in that place? So we want to invest in that which offers freedom to the people. We acknowledge culture and activism already exists in poor, culturally diverse places, even if those forms of culture aren't necessarily recognised by the institutions, or if they're not funded very well at all. Can we be custodians of place or guards helping to preserve its soul? People who live in those places should be the ones to decide what happens and what doesn't happen. They shouldn't be consulted in the aftermath once these draft master plans come in, with the consultations and all that stuff. Disclaimer, by the time those things come out, 9 times out of 10 it's already a surefire thing that it's going to happen. I just want to talk about some of the things that we've been doing, how we've kind of been trying to work out what the heat is of our city and what we think that we should be investing in. So in 2015, I heard this already, so I'm sorry. 2015, so one of the things I do is I write plays and perform, and I was on tour, and I was pregnant. I became obsessed with Jane the Virgin. Anyone? Jane the Virgin in series 1, I didn't finish it. Series 1 was in a hotel, and I was like, ooh. So I was staying, while I was on tour, I had yet to be paid from the theatre I was working with. Anybody know that trope? I'd been yet to be paid, and I was staying, kind of mixing my 2 weeks, like Airbnb, couch surfing, travel lodge, 2 nights, felt like I was boarding. And it kind of raised questions for me about the ways in which artists are accommodated, the finance, the ways in which there are systems that support the artist's presentation, but not so much artist care and well-being. I started to think, what would be the physical spaces that we could design? Is there something that we have to say about the ways in which money flows in our cities, the way in which money flows in our cultural industries? And so I was thinking about Birmingham. So it's a city that has so many festivals, a few really, really big, large-scale institutions that are accommodating artists 1,000 times a month, and they need somewhere to stay. And what happens is those institutions, they put them in Travelodge, or they put them in Airbnb, or they find digs or whatever else. But the money that they then spend on those artists and that accommodation disappears from the city as quickly as it comes in. We said, is there a way that we can design something that locks in the value much, much longer, so that we could then redistribute it in an imaginative way? Can we build a business model that is much more circular in principle and execution, and working with a financial model that everybody knows? So we said, well, if we were to design a hotel that was run with this premise, that was kind of accommodating the needs of travelling artists, was open to anyone who wanted to feel that heat, how would that run? What would need to happen in order for that to make sense? And then we started to think about spaces for joy. We were talking about this earlier today. Is that for so many of us, in this sort of post-2008 crash, a lot of our spaces for joy were the first things to disappear. The libraries, the green spaces, everything in between. And so there's almost like a need to reclaim that. And I've been thinking about what my space for joy is. I'm going to set a scene, tell me if you know it. So my granddad's house is a 3-bedroom house. He has 8 children. They each have about 4 children. House full, right? Front room, sacred, glass cabinet, sofa that you can't really sit down on unless the police come or like some good news comes. pristine photos everywhere, glass cabinets with glasses in China that you can't use, but it's just there to look pretty. The other room is popping. They got a dining room that's too big for the room itself, right? And there's all these people that are in there, like my dad's politicking at the kitchen, like table. My nieces and my nephews are like running around in front of the TV. They're trying to show us the latest dance routine and all that kind of stuff. The kitchen, like all my aunties and my uncles are like cooking and making rum punch and all that kind of stuff. And the garden's just like, it's just a madness. The house is chaos, but it's fun and it's joy. And everyone is in there doing everything together. And I said, that's my space for joy. How would we design this? Is there a way that we can match the economic need for a hotel and accommodation as a massive business expense for so many artists with this need to create spaces for joy? And so we designed the concept for Abuelos, which is an artist-led hotel. I'm going to come back to this stuff in a minute. So Abuelos, grandparents or granddad in Spanish. My granddad's Dominican, old type of granddad. And so we were thinking about like what would the economics need to be and how would we need to organise in order to get a space. We were offered 3 buildings in 2017, 5-year lease, 5-year lease, 10-year lease, and that was it. And knowing the areas of the city where those offers came from, they were in spaces that in 10 years were going to look radically different. 10, 15 years were going to look radically different to what they are now. So we knew if we said yes to those opportunities, we would be totally complicit in a greater strategy about who is able to use those spaces. So we said no, and at the time a lot of people said, oh, why would you say no? Why wouldn't you just take it? And we said we have to be advocating for something bigger than what we're getting right now. We can't attempt to even recreate, the same corrupt systemic abuses that we've been seeing and that we've been complicit in for so long. So we said no. Eventually we were introduced to another developer, and the first question I said was, can we buy the building, or are you going to try and keep onto it? And they said, if you could raise the money, we'd be definitely interested in doing that. For me, that was the first thing where I thought, this is a worthwhile negotiation potentially. I'm still incredibly sceptical about property developers, don't get me wrong, but just that they were willing to talk about the long term, and that long term wasn't something that they controlled, meant it was something that we could enter, I don't want to say fairly, nothing is fair. It meant we could enter sort of knowing what the game was. But interestingly, so where that location is, so where we've been talking to the developer now for nearly 18 months, we've just raised 1.5 million and I'm finally about to take it over the line. Thank you. Thank you. So the geographical location, like I said, this is my first time ever in Scotland, so I don't know Glasgow. Birmingham, this incredibly centralised city, there's a ward called Ladywood. Ladywood is made up of half the city centre, which is like shiny, sexy glass towers, all the banks, lots of big hotels, chains galore, fine dining, blah, 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 blah. The other half, by all the classic metrics, is one of the most economically deprived, culturally diverse neighbourhoods in the city. And this site sits slap bang in the middle of the two. So we looked at that and said, if it's not us going for it, they will definitely go for a chain hotel, a brewery, some form of like bowling alley that serves liquor, like all of those things that it's like we could have those anywhere, and they exist all across the city, and we need different things. We need different things for the communities that are here, and have to be, advocating for those people who are here. And how do we then lock in things so that those people who are here now are protected for the long term and not in the aftermath, sort of left to leave or forced out or all those other things. That conversation that went from the hotel, it led us into conversations around housing. So in the region, the West Midlands, we've got the Commonwealth Games coming up, we've got the City of Culture in Coventry 2021, and we know that the way that money flows around these big nationwide things, these nationwide platforms, is a very particular way of money flow. It's a very particular thing that happens politically, economically, socially. And we said, is there a way that we can start to design some sort of like protection mechanisms for the people who live in those communities that are most vulnerable? So we started to look at community land trusts. Community land trusts, for those that don't know, originated actually in America. A bunch of African Americans were trying to advocate so that they could preserve and keep their land away from the country that wants to rid of everything. And so they set up community land trusts as a form to like organise and protect what they had. And really over here it's been quite a slow take-up, but there's been some really interesting movements that have happened. So we said, is there a way that we could buy the block back in order for it to be collectively preserved, restored, honoured, and all of those things? Across the road from where the hotel is going to be, we're just about to take on a house called Yard. I'm Jamaican, what can I say? And Yard is about honouring like ancestry, honouring all the things that have come to make so many of our cultures rich, but so many times they're the things that get ignored or marginalised or pushed out. So we said, is there a way that we could start with one house, and then how might we collectively, because everything has to be collective, nothing can be about individual gain. Is there a way that we can collectively start to acquire these houses so that they can stay in the ownership of the community that exists there now? So Yard. Then we started to look at lots of different types of infrastructure. But all of that work then, it led to some really interesting conversations. So I definitely did not come from an architectural background, a city planning background, or anything like that. I claim to say I knew nothing about economics, although, so I am Caribbean, right? So in my culture we have partners. Anybody heard of a partner? Right, so a partner, for those that don't know, so when my granddad, for example, came here from Jamaica, he could not, like many of his peers, his family, his friends, could not access like mainstream banking. So a lot of people who came here had to organise their own form of like saving money. It was totally based on like trust, and you might have like a banker who you like trust to hold your money for you, and they redistribute by rounds and stuff like that. So we started to think about partners and say, you know, we do know about economics, that we've always known about things, is whether we've had the language or the tools to be able to articulate those things, or even archive what we do and how we organise, has been the question. But I started to like, you know, check myself. It's not that we don't know or have anything to say about architecture, about economics or politics or anything, but it's, do we have we ever had the means, the access to be able to do that outwardly? And in thinking about that, and thinking about all these advancements, I'm a hip hop nerd. Anybody? I'm a hip hop nerd, and we developed a project called Beats, Rhymes and Cities. So I'm really inspired by another thing to Google, hip hop architecture as a field of study. So hip hop architecture is basically saying that they've always had a relationship. You know, if we think about where hip hop came from, the estates, the projects in New York where it originated from, grime, drill, all those things that are in some ways derivatives of that art form. We talk about that in relation to its social environment, then we can see hip hop as like a critique of its built environment. So we started to say, is there a way then that we could like remix hip hop and talk about how we would actually design the city, how we would actually design our spaces. We designed this program for young people where they would respond with their spaces for joy, and we'd use generative design to input the data that they come up with, the things that they want to see in their places that would influence what this architecture looks like. They would 3D print that, it would go on this like massive table, and suddenly they've designed a city. We go through, you know, how that city is funded, we go through how that works, what are the economics that need to make place logistically, what does this work, what are all the infrastructures that need to go around that. And then we see that actually young people, like all of us, have always had something to say about the places that we live, and it's not necessarily that they don't want to be architects, but maybe no one's ever had a conversation about architecture in the city in the way that resonates to them. And so I just want to, I'm going to quickly go through 10 principles and some of the things that we've kind of like learned, and being really acclimatized to what the people are saying about the future of, we need a new word, man, I can't call it regeneration, the new ... Okay, so repurpose and reimagine. I think we need to be alchemists in our community. That's a hip-hop reference if anyone else is a nerd. I think we need to imagine new possibilities for what others disregard and devalue. I think we need to find values and support others to do the same. Engaged participation. Anybody else really like shaky about the word participation, especially in gentrification context? But really this is about space to champion localism. This is about building long-term and deep continued relationships with our neighbours and residents. I'm really conscious that I don't like the word citizens. There's too many things going on where it feels like citizen is such an exclusive word, so I'm using residents intentionally. And this is about providing multiple access points for different types of relationships, different types of connections. And one year-long project is not how you get like deep engaged participation, but at the same time it's funny how like funding circles and all that kind of determine these durations. The thing that I want to leave with that point, engaged participation, is it's an African proverb: nothing about us without us is for us. Share learning. Oh, it's gone. Share learning, open source as much as possible, make space for lots of different types of learning, lots of different types of education and experimentation. Know your stuff, find master plans wherever you can. Sometimes we can't get ahead of the game. We were talking earlier about what do we do when there's so much resistance and so many things are like moving so far ahead. What do we do? The best thing to do is just organise and do it, because when we're trying to create like alternative structures, there are going to be so many layers of shakeries. Where are the children? There's going to be so many levels of all of this stuff that literally does not want you to succeed at what you're doing, and you have to just do it anyway, and that's the best way to do that. Archive and document everything. Everything. Embrace uncertainty. So make room for imagination, basically. Intuition, I'm a big stand for intuition and gut. Ambiguity, like those are good things. Allow for slow reveals and fluidity. Capitalism likes certainty, we do not. Definitive, risk aversion, all that kind of stuff, that's what capitalism thrives off. We're trying to create alternative things here. Good design only. Beauty is a basic human service. Poor people, poorer people deserve aesthetics and desirability too. Beauty has magnetism, beauty is cared for, and it promotes regard. Place over time. Experiments, interventions, investments, they all require significant time. There's nothing like a quick fix solution to be realised. And this is why anchor spaces are so necessary. It's why the libraries and the community centres were so pivotal, because we need those constants, the consistent sources, if nothing else, of energy, of spirit of a place. And cultivation is durational. There's no quick fix. Intention resonates. The next one is stack, leverage and access. It's critical to have skin in the game, like there's no other way. There's a lot of like flaky people who are supposedly investing in this work, and as soon as something else becomes a trend, we move on. So we need to understand that all investments, including sweat equity, are necessary. Each part of the process, from the very beginning idea through to the energy needed to execute the idea, the design, the thinking, the labour, the actual exercise of the thing, it's all necessary, and it all creates reverberation that we continue to leverage, and each thing helps to move it on. And early success actually can really enable that momentum. It can enable us reaching that next point in the process. We need to amplify that. That has gone. I said it's going to do its own thing. Amplify that energy, gain multiple spheres of influence where you can, and sometimes that doesn't mean looking to institutions and saying, please validate what we're doing. Sometimes that influence can be with your peers, with your neighbours, sometimes it needs to be. And turn that buzz into investment of every kind. Like I said, sweat equity is just as important as financial. Resources should be diverse, they should be stacked, they should be bundled, but they have to be crucially aligned with your mission, because mission drift is so easy. Constellations. Has anybody read Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown? Can't recommend that book enough. I can't even articulate what that book is, but a lot of what Adrienne talks about is interdependency, and it's something that I'm deeply inspired by. I'm starting to understand all things in nature are independent, and it's those systems that we should be replicating. Charismatic leaders are not the whole movement. Complementary skills and practices and thought processes help us to advance the work in unimaginable ways. So we need rich ecosystems, and that's what we're moving into, like an abundance over scarcity mindset. Platforms. Many cities, face some challenges. lots of the same challenges, neglect. I was walking from the train station here and I saw literally in like 5 minutes so many homeless people lined up, like it was insane. And we see that in every single city. We're all experiencing neglect, we're all experiencing economic disparity, centralised resources, abandoned buildings, and siloed industries. I thought that was a really interesting conversation that we had earlier about silos, because that siloed nature affects the way that we think and see the world. It's the reason why I would have never thought I could do something like a hotel or a housing project. It's the reason why I'd never think I'd have something to say about politics. Platforms are needed to support residents to realise their ideas and their thoughts and to exercise their actual power. We ran a project called the Developers Dinner, and that was it's now a series because it created such a beautiful space. But I was really saying, that communities themselves, that residents themselves are their own developers. Like, who better to imagine, to develop, and to think about their space? We don't need hierarchical property developers coming in and telling us what our neighbourhood should be, that we have the power ourselves. The Developers Dinner brought in lots of people who are thinking about what it means to develop space in different ways. And the conversations from that have just been incredible. Set up a Developers Dinner. Gather, organise, build community, create anchor spaces, and that's where transformative shit really starts. Thank you so much.